Let's actually get started by deploying our DLT pipeline on Airflow in our local machine. So currently, we already have a DLT pipeline script that works. Now, what we have to do is to represent this pipeline as an Airflow DAG and then deploy it later with the local executor. So let's start with the DAG itself. Here are the steps that we have to take for creating the DAG. First, of course, we have to install Airflow. And one thing I have to specify is that this Airflow must be equal to above Airflow 2.5, but it can't be 3. And that's just because those are the versions that our Airflow helper is currently compatible with. Next, we have to push our project to GitHub. Again, this is one of the prerequisites for using the Airflow helper. And then third is creating the actual DAG script. Creating the script itself is going to be pretty easy. As I told you, you won't be writing a script from scratch. Rather, a script will be written for you, and you'll just be making tweaks here and there to match the current DLT script that we have. So let's get started. First with the Airflow installation. I'm going to switch over to my browser. I'm going to go to Google and I'm just going to type Airflow installation pip. And as you can see here, the first result should be the Airflow docs. And remember that the Airflow helper is not compatible with Airflow 3. So here I'm going to switch over to an older version. In this case, it's going to be 2.11. And you have the option for sure to use these pip install commands that you're seeing here. These are a lot shorter, and these are basically one-liners. I, however, strongly suggest that you use one of the bigger blocks, which I believe are here. There we go. So this block here shows you how to install Airflow with the extras and providers. And this is uh, a more thorough approach to installation, and I would recommend it because you mitigate the risk of having any version conflicts later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install all of these one by one. So let me do that right now. Two, three, and finally, so this is our command for the actual pip install. Remember that I'm using UI because I want to save on time. So, sorry, UV. I want to use UV to save on time. So I'm going to put UV first and press enter. Okay, great. So we have our um, thing installed already. So that's taken care of. Let's now create our GitHub repo in which we're going to push this project. So I'm going to switch over to my browser and I have my repo open. Let me go to repositories and new. So I'm going to just make up something like create, yeah, I'll just say Airflow to, sorry, I've been mixed up. DLT and Airflow integration demo. I'm just making it up. You can choose whatever you want. I'll just choose to make this private and I'll create this repo. Okay, so we've created the repo. What we have to do now is take our project and just push it in this repo. That's what I'm going to do with a lot of these commands that are already provided. First, of course, is I want to create Git. Next is I want to add all my files here. And one thing I want to mention is that when I say everything, I mean everything excluding the credentials. So as you recall, the credentials are in the secrets toml file, but when you initialize DLT with the DLT init, you get a gitignore file that automatically includes the secrets.toml. What that means is when you add your files in Git, you are not tracking the secrets toml, so you don't have to worry about pushing secrets to your repository. So let's move on. We've added our files. Let's do our commit. There we go. So our 4 files are there. Now I want to perform the remote origin command which includes the the Git link. So that's this one. And I'll be doing everything on main. And finally, our final command, I push. Okay, great. So that's that. Now now that I've pushed my code to my GitHub repository, let me just confirm that. Great, everything is there and no secrets toml. Yep, no secrets toml. The next thing I want to do is I want to actually create my DAG. So for this, I'm going to use help from the DLT docs because they actually have a page that show you how to create DAGs out of DLT. So you don't have to remember everything by heart. So if you want to find it, you can just go to the search bar in the DLT docs and just type in Airflow. There'll be a page on deploying a pipeline with Airflow and Google Composer. You can just ignore the Google Composer part because we're not deploying anything to cloud just yet. So if we look at the steps, we can add our DLT project directory to GitHub, which we already did. Ensure your pipeline works. So of course, the deployment won't work if the pipeline script doesn't work. So I already ran my script. If you want to make sure, you can, of course, follow this step. And the next is, of course, to initialize deployment. So first is to install these dependencies and then run this command, which actually creates the DAG file. So first I'll copy this and I'll paste. Next, I'm going to take this file and paste it. And now before I enter, if you see here, the command is dlt deploy pipeline name pipeline Airflow Composer. So this third part here is a placeholder. So we have to replace this with the name of our actual script, which in this case is dlt pipeline. So I'm going to do that here and press enter. And this should create our DAG. Let's look over here. There we go. Now, let's take a look at what we got from our deploy command. First, we have a directory called build, which has a YAML file. This is out of the scope of this demo, so I won't be touching that. More relevantly, we have a folder called DAGs, which contains our DAG script. So let me click on the script. And here we have our script that basically translates our DLT pipeline into an Airflow DAG. Of course, a lot of this is boilerplate, and we actually have to make a few tweaks in order to make sure that it actually works. The first thing I'm going to do is just walk you through this code here, just go over the important bits, and then I'm going to show you what changes you should be making to make the code functional. First, of course, we're doing all our imports, not much to say there, except we are using our Airflow helper, of course, to import this specific class. Next, we're defining our default arguments, including things like retries and email, which is not so important for our use case. Next, of course, we're creating our DAG function. In this case, instead of a context manager, we're using a decorator. That's totally fine. In this DAG, we are defining our schedule interval, start date, and all those important details regarding how the DAG is run. You will notice that one thing is missing from this, and that is the DAG ID. And now every DAG needs an ID, and we haven't, and this deploy command doesn't include it, of course, and so that's something you'll have to fill in yourself. Let's carry on to the actual function. So first, of course, we're creating this tasks variable based on the class that we got from the Airflow helper, which is basically going to be used to create our Airflow tasks out of a given pipeline, which we'll be doing later. And this line here, we are importing our source from our original script. So if we go back, if you recall, we created a source object using the REST API source function and a given config. So what we'll be doing is we'll actually be importing this source directly. And we'll be using it for subsequent operations. So next, we create our pipeline object here, which you already know how that works. And then finally, using all of these variables we created, or these objects, in our case, the tasks using the Airflow helper, we are able to feed it the pipeline object and the source object that we're importing, and this will basically be creating our DAG, excuse me. So that's how the script functions. As I already explained, though, this code is not functional yet because of all the changes we have to make. The first change we have to make is, of course, create our ID or define our ID. I believe the variable name is DAG ID, and then yeah, we can just say GitHub DAG, and I'll add a comma. That should be that. The next thing I want to do is this import command is, this import command is just generic. So we need to replace the from with our actual script name, and we need to replace our source with the actual source. So the name of our script is DLT pipeline. Yeah. And the name of the source is GitHub source. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it. Great. Let me just comment that here. Replace with actual script and source name. Perfect. The next thing is, if you look at our pipeline object, by default, it is set to send your data in the DuckDB database. Of course, in our case, we want to send it to BigQuery. So I need to change destination to BigQuery. So I'm going to just say, just going to type in BigQuery here instead, and that's resolved. And finally, for our final line in which we provide tasks with the pipeline object and the source object, we just have to replace this placeholder source with the actual source that we created, which is GitHub source. So I'm going to replace this with GitHub source. Now you'll notice that we actually didn't make that many tweaks here. Let's count them. So we made 1 to change the ID, 2 to basically change our import line to match our code, our script, and our source name. The third is we changed the destination, and the fourth is we replaced our placeholder source with the actual source. So that's just 4 changes or 4 tweaks in total that we had to make to the script we were given to make it functional. At least I hope it's functional. I haven't tested it yet. So that's all. Those are all the changes we need to make here. We're not done yet though, because we actually have to also do something with the original script. As you can see from this line, when this script imports dlt.py, in my case, it's going to expect that script to be in the same location as the DAG itself. So I'm actually going to take this script and I'm going to drag it here. Okay. That's number 1. Number 2 is when I import this entire script in my DAG script, I only want the source, right? I don't need everything that follows. I don't need to create a pipeline and run it because that's already being done with the Airflow helper. So I have 2 options. One is I could of course just get rid of it, and that's totally fine. I think a more elegant solution is just to put this under main guard, sorry. So you can still keep it, but it won't run when you import it into a different script. So I'm just going to say if name equals to main. Once again, you can just get rid of it. That's totally up to you. And then I'll put all this code within this block. Okay, so I'm a bit pessimistic, so I may have missed something, but I believe that's everything we need to do to create a DAG out of our original DLT pipeline. Our next step is going to be actually to perform the deployment and run this thing in Airflow.